Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword is one of my favorite Zelda games, but it's definitely one of the most divisive Zelda games. Many people don't like the game for its motion controls and linear story, but I still think the game is amazing. I also think the game deserves a second chance. Skyward Sword would benefit greatly from an HD remaster on Switch in my opinion, and I seriously hope it will happen eventually. Skyward Sword is the only 3D Zelda game not to be ported to a new system with updated visuals. And speaking of updated visuals, this game would look great in HD. The art style is a gorgeous blend between Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. I think it actually looks very similar to the Breath of the Wild art style. But even with the amazing art style, the Wii held back this game from looking truly great. The Wii's low specs ended up making the game look fuzzy and pixelated. A higher resolution would make this game look beautiful. There are already some HD texture packs that have been tested by modding on PC, and they help make the game look so much better. Updated visuals would already make an HD remaster on Switch worth it, but now we get to talk about why everyone hates this game. The motion controls. Whenever people talk about Skyward Sword on the Switch, one of the first questions is always, but will the game have motion controls? And this is a very complicated question to answer. There are many factors in play affecting whether or not this game could work with or without motion controls. The biggest problem is that the game has been designed entirely around the idea of motion controls. All the enemies, bosses, puzzles, and items are based around that idea. For me personally, it wouldn't bug me if the game was still motion controls only. I think the Joy-Cons work great, and honestly, I prefer to play Skyward Sword with motion controls anyway. But for a lot of people, motion controls being the only option would be a big problem. So I think Nintendo should try to find a way to add button controls. I've thought a lot about how button controls could work in Skyward Sword, and I think Nintendo could pull it off. One way I think it could work is if the right stick controlled the sword movement and the second button controlled when you strike. You would still move with the left stick and control the camera with the right, but when you hold down ZL to target an enemy, the right stick would no longer control the camera but instead your sword, and then to attack you would press ZR. This would give you all the control that motion controls would, but there are a few problems with this. For example, I haven't quite figured out how the stab move would work. And if it was done this way, you wouldn't be able to use your sword without targeting something, which wouldn't be great. I think button controls would be a little messy and probably not the best way to control the game, but I also think they are a very important part of an HD remaster, especially with the Switch's portability. If you can only control the game with motion controls, then you could never play the game in handheld mode. And when people find out that the only way to control the new Zelda game on Switch is motion controls, I imagine some people would be upset. Of course, if they did add button controls, there should be options for how you control the game. Before you even start playing, I think the game should ask you whether you'd like to play with motion or button controls. This would resolve many people's biggest problem with Skyward Sword and allow more people to play this game. Let's move on to another reason why people don't like this game, the linear world. Skyward Sword is a very linear game, but that doesn't make it a bad game. I think the linear story really helps deliver a great narrative, but there are some problems. But before we talk about how Nintendo could change the linear story, let's look at how previous 3D Zelda games have been updated. Most of the time, the only updates that are made to the core game are quality of life improvements. Things that make the game easier to play without changing the story much. For example, when Wind Waker was remastered for Wii U, they added a new option called the Swift Sail. This made traveling around the world faster and less tedious. They also changed a few elements of the Triforce quest to make it less annoying. So what could be changed in Skyward Sword to make the game better? Well, there are a lot of things, but here are some of my ideas. One thing that always bugged me in Skyward Sword is that when you jump off of Skyloft, the game has to load before you can fly. This really breaks up the act of jumping off the island, making it less fun. So, in an HD remaster of the game, I think Skyloft and the sky should be one big area, no loading required. So you can jump off the island and call your Loftwing and get right into flying without waiting. I think this would help make the game world feel a lot more open. Another thing that could be changed in this remaster is Fi. She is Link's companion in this game, and a lot of people do not like her very much. I never actually found her that annoying, but she definitely interrupts a lot. I think Nintendo is scared of players getting confused, so she basically explains everything to you. Once a character tells you something, Fi will pop out and basically repeat it all to you again. She also bugs you when you have low battery. I think that they should add options for Fi. For younger players who may not understand everything, they should be able to use an option where Fi helps them out. But for everyone else, there should be an option where she's just a little less annoying. They shouldn't cut her out of the game entirely, but just stop her from saying some of the more obvious and hand-holding things. As for changing the actual story itself, I don't think much should be changed. People take issue with the repetitive imprisoned fights and the multiple silent realms, but honestly, all of that is an important part of the story and shouldn't be cut. I think that Skyward Sword would be received better by players today versus in 2011 because of Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild is such a drastic change from the Zelda formula and was anything but linear. Now that fans have the game that they've been asking for, I think more people could appreciate Skyward Sword. All the areas where Breath of the Wild struggles, Skyward Sword excels. Skyward Sword has an amazing story, great dungeons, and beautiful music, which are all things that Breath of the Wild was missing. I think that Skyward Sword is the perfect game to complement Breath of the Wild. There are still a lot of things in Skyward Sword that could be changed, but those are some of my ideas. But now let's talk about if this game will ever even exist. And I actually think there's a pretty good chance that this could happen. Like I said earlier, Skyward Sword is the only 3D Zelda game not to be updated and put onto a newer system, so I think it will happen eventually. And as for the release date, I think it would release in 2020. The Switch has had a Zelda game every year since launch, and I'm guessing that the sequel to Breath of the Wild won't release until at least 2021. So that leaves next year, 2020, open for a Zelda game. And I think Skyward Sword HD would fill that spot perfectly. And I also think enough time has passed for it to be remastered. If it releases in 2020, it will be 9 years since its original release, which seems about right. So I do think that this game being announced is fairly likely, and I really hope it happens. Skyward Sword HD is probably my most wanted Switch game. I just love this game, and a remaster of it on Switch would be the best way for more people to experience this masterpiece. So what do you think about all this? Would you like to see an HD remaster of Skyward Sword on the Switch? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see ya in the next one.